Hi guys, thanks for joining me today. I'm Marilyn and my channel is Making with Marilyn. Now if you've been around for a while, you know I love to make sublimation tumblers. I had a hard time deciding on a design for just one tumbler, so today we're going to make two and they're going to be Mother's Day inspired tumblers. These are Hippo sublimation tumblers and I'll put a link to them in the video description as well as some of the other things that I'm using. Now I've already cleaned my tumblers with 90% rubbing alcohol and a paper towel. If you have a lint-free cloth, that would be even better. Once I get my designs ready for print, we'll print them out on this HTV Ront sublimation paper. Then I'll cut it down with a rotary tool, a metal ruler, and a cutting mat. Now, before I can do my design, I need to know the dimensions of the tumblers. I always measure each and every tumbler that I use, and I'll do that with this tumbler measuring tape. That'll measure around the outside, and then I'll use my ruler to get the height. Now, some other things that I'm going to use. I'm going to use some heat-resistant tape. I love to use my heat-resistant tape on my sublimation tumblers. For me, I get a better product if I use a decent amount of tape. You'll see that in a little bit. I'm also going to use a heat-resistant glove. And then when it's time to put the tumblers in the press, I have some extra paper that I'll wrap around the tumblers. That's going to protect the press. Now we're going to use this Craft Express old-fashioned manual tumbler press today. I already have a tumbler inside. I use this just to heat up my presses. The instructions say to do that, so that's what I'll do. Now, you know what? Let's do one of the tumblers in this old-fashioned manual press. We'll do the other tumbler in an auto-rotate press. So if this is something you're interested in seeing, sit back, relax, and let's get started. It's time to measure our tumblers before we can do our design. You have to know the precise measurements in order to print the right size of design. So I have this tumbler tape measure, and you just put it around your tumbler. These are straight tumblers, so it's going to be the same at the top, the bottom, and the middle. And I'm going to pull this side really tight while I hold on to this side with my thumb. And this is showing 9 5/16. That is slightly less than 9.4 inches, so I will make my design 9.4 inches wide. Now these two tumblers came in the same shipment, so they should be the same size, but let's just check. Let's make sure that 9.4 would cover this one too. It is the same size, so we're good. Now to check how tall I need to make my image, I'm going to go ahead and start at the 1 line. I like to do what's called burning an inch because I can't see down here anymore. And let me show you on another ruler. At that end of the ruler, there's extra space. So we're going to burn an inch. We'll start at the 1 inch mark, and I have it slightly above the top of the tumbler, and it goes down to 9. Remember, we have to subtract that inch, so it needs to be about 8 inches tall. I'm going to print mine at 8.15, so we'll go 9.4 wide by 8.15 tall. Let's jump onto the computer so I can show you my designs, and I'll show you how I print these out. Now, I had a hard time deciding between two different designs. This one caught my eye for my mother-in-law. I think she's going to love this. What I do want you to note is you can see that the image fades out as it gets closer to the word mama. So I fully expect there to be some fading here, and that's in the design, so that's okay. Let's go to my downloads and let me show you the other one that I saw. I absolutely love this one. Those colors are beautiful, they're vibrant. I'm going to keep this one for myself. Now I'm going to print these in Inkscape today. Here's one of the designs. My paper is set for letter size paper, and I need to change the size of the design. Let's go up here first and change it to inches. And then I'm going to have my width at 9.4. And then I'll tab over and I'll have my height at 8.15. Now that I've done that, I need to rotate it. If I were to print it like this, anything off the side of the paper wouldn't print. So we're going to do two things. First, we're going to go up to Object, and we're going to say Flip Horizontal. With Sublimation Tumblers, you always flip your image horizontally before you print it. Now I'm going to go back to Object, and I'll say Rotate 90 degrees. It doesn't matter if it's clockwise or counterclockwise. It all fits on the sheet, so I'm ready to print that one. Let's get the other one ready. So we'll change this to inches. And again, 8.15 for the height and 9.4 for the width. Just like we did last time, we're going to flip this horizontally. So I go to Object, Flip Horizontal. Now let's go up to Object and rotate 90 degrees. We'll go ahead and print this one first. On my Mac, I'll hit Command P for print. I'm using my Epson EcoTank 15,000 series printer. That wasn't made to be a sublimation printer. It's not marketed to be a sublimation printer, but a lot of crafters buy those and then they put sublimation ink in them instead of the ink that came with it. That's what I did. I'm going to go to Page Setup and I will change this to one-sided. I'll make sure it's set to print in color, and then I want to change the normal print quality to high. All right, let's go ahead and print it. While that one's printing, I'll go ahead and close this one. And now we'll print this one. The same thing, I'm going to do Command P for print. Let's go ahead and check those settings. It's still on one-sided. It is set to color, and it's set for high quality. Now that these have printed, it's time to cut them down to size. Here they are, and notice they don't look that vibrant. They look a little bit dull. That's the way sublimation ink looks until you add that high heat for an extended amount of time. Now this one's going to be a little harder to see where to cut it because you don't really see the edges of the design. So I'll just have to make sure that it's around 9.4 inches wide. Since there's nothing on the outside of this, if I don't have it exactly right, it's okay. This is a very, very forgiving design. First of all, the seam's going to be pretty easy because at the seam it's just going to be white. Also, at the top and the bottom, there is a lot of white. It's harder to sublimate well a design like this because you have bold color going to each edge and the bottom and the top. Now, before I sublimate this, I want you to notice how that is faded out and there's some white on that heart. That's going to show up on the tumbler too. And if I didn't point this out when I show the tumbler, you and I both might think that we had a ghosting issue. But I just noticed this and I wanted to point that out. Also, just like when I was on the computer, this image becomes faded, and I point things like that out so that you don't think this is the fault of the tumbler or the tumbler press. So let's start out with the easier design, the one that I can see where I need to cut. I like to use this metal ruler. It has cork on the back. And I place it down so that there is a tiny bit of ink showing. If you accidentally have any of the white left, then you're risking getting a white streak on your tumbler. So I print mine just a little bit wider than they need to be because I cut off a tiny bit of the ink. It's hard to see, but that's the tiny little strip I have left. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this down, then we'll come back and we'll do the other design. Now while I'm taping this up, let me go ahead and turn the tumbler press on. Here's the burner tumbler I was talking about. It is a mess. I just use the same one over and over and over because in the instructions, most presses say, have a tumbler in there when you're heating it up. All right, I'm going to close this up and the pressure is good. Now as this heats up, sometimes it gets harder and harder to close it or to bring it together because heat causes things to expand. So that tumbler in there can expand. So before I put these tumblers in, I'll make sure the pressure is still good. Now with this press, the button is right over here to the right, and it starts heating up. I have the press set to 385 degrees, and then I have the timer set to 50 seconds. I'll actually press it twice. All right, let's go ahead and start with my tumbler, the one with this really gorgeous, vibrant design. Again, it doesn't look vibrant now, but it will. I have my tumbler upside down, and I'll turn my image upside down. And it just barely goes all the way around. I like to have a tiny little bit of overlap. Now when I tape these up, I also like for the paper to just go barely beyond the top of the tumbler, just barely, and you can see it does. Now I have a little tool that I should have over here. It's just something that holds my tumbler while I tape it, but I forgot to bring it over here. Now this is my favorite tape for wrapping tumblers. And the reason I really like it is because it's very thin from top to bottom. If you have too much pressure on your tumbler, you can actually see kind of an indentation where the tape is. And I think that thinner tape is better for tumblers. And by thin, I mean from top to bottom. I do like that it's wider. This is, I think, 20 millimeters wide, and I love that it's wider. Now, I did not get that on there straight, but it's not going to affect the tumbler. Now, I tape all the way down my seam, and I'm struggling right now because I really didn't get a long enough piece of tape, but I'm going to make it work. I make sure everything's really tight, and I pull from the side of the paper that's on top to the side of the paper that's on bottom. And I'm going to close up this little gap right here because I want that paper really tight down on my tumbler. Okay, let's go ahead and do the same thing on the bottom. I'm going to put my tape on the side of the paper that's on top, and then squeeze the paper together while I secure it down. And then I'm going to pull it to the bottom really tightly to pull that paper up against the bottom of the tumbler. Because again, the tumbler does bevel, and so using a lot of tape helps it hug the bottom of the tumbler. Now for the top, I put 2 pieces of tape on there. With the first piece, I like the top of the tape to be pretty much even with the top of the tumbler. So we're just going to wrap this around, not super tight. I'm not trying to stretch the tape yet. but we're just going to wrap it around fairly even with the top of the tumbler. Now with this next piece, it's going to be halfway on, halfway off. And I'm going to pull it really tight. Starting in the same place on this top piece of paper. I'm going to hold it with my thumb, and I'm going to pull this extremely tight. Sorry, you can't see it. I'm using my chest to hold the cup. Okay, so I did it very, very tight to get kind of a rebound effect on the tape. So it's automatically or naturally pulling in. I'm going to go around, press straight over, and then once I've done that, I'm going to start adhering the tape to the inside of the tumbler. Now after this, I inspect the top of the tumbler and I look for little gaps. I look for where the paper might be gapped out and not up against the tumbler. And I think I see a little one right here. Let me get a pointer. We're going to call my weeding tool my pointer. Okay, so look right here. I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but you can see that paper kind of folded and bent out a little, and I want to press that down tight against the tumbler. I don't know if that's visible or not, but what I'm going to do is go around the tumbler, and anywhere I see a little fold like that with my paper, just going to press it in with my thumbnail, or you can use something that's hard plastic. You can just go around and rub it like that. Sometimes I'll also do it on my table. Now usually I don't like to do it directly on my table. I like to do it on my cutting mat because I don't want to dent my table or mess it up any worse than it already is. But it's going to be fine today. All right, it's time to do the bottom. I am going to do the same process. This time the paper that's on top is that way. So I'll start there, and you're going to see me do the same process. So I'll speed it up. Now because the bottom is tapered or beveled, you really have to inspect it a little bit better than the top and push out any of those folds that you see. Now the last thing I'm going to do is really rub against this seam. I'm a little bit worried about the paper right here. I feel like when I got that tape kind of sideways, it wasn't down as much as I usually like it to be down. I could see a little gap there. Hopefully this will turn out okay. All right, my press is up to temperature. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a little paper cradle. And I like to have the opening to the right because I'm right-handed, and I'm going to turn the tumbler halfway through. I'll go ahead and take my burner tumbler out and we'll put the real tumbler in. Now I moved my press a little bit. I felt like it was pushing against the post that holds my camera, and I didn't want it being all shaky, so I moved it forward just a tiny bit. Here's my tumbler. I'm going to put the tumbler in the little paper cradle so that the seam is forward. I like to start with the seam either forward or at the back. I don't like the seam up because I feel like as this closes and it puts pressure, it could cause this to kind of lift and gap. I don't know if that's accurate, but that's just my feeling. And so I start with the seam at the front or the back. Typically the front. So we're going to slide it in, and we're going to make sure it's fairly centered. Your press is going to close more evenly if it's in the center. And let's close it up. I only have about 8 more seconds. When the timer goes off, I'm going to open the press, rotate my tumbler 180 degrees, and then I'll start it over. Here's what the tumbler looks like. I'm going to go ahead and set it down, tape up my other tumbler, bring my auto tumbler press over here, and we'll use it for the next one. I went ahead and set this at 385 for 50 seconds. I wanted it to be the same time and temp that we used last time. I think usually on stainless steel tumblers I've used 365 for 50 seconds, but I bumped it up a little bit just so we're comparing apples to apples. Now here's my tumbler. I am going to go ahead and wrap that with some printer paper. And with this press I use printer paper because you can't really drop a cradle in there like you do the other presses. Then I put a couple pieces of tape on the printer paper just to hold it securely. Now when I close the press, the paper that's used to protect this, it's probably going to kind of bulge out of this area. That's okay. It's just the protective paper. It's not my actual sublimation paper. Just like in my other presses though, I like to have the seam either to the left or the right, not where the gap is. In this case, it's to the left. So we'll set it down in there, and then you press right here to get it to start. I'm going to move this over a little bit so you have a better view. Except now you can't see the clock. Okay, hopefully that's okay. So you see it counting down. Once that gets to 0, it's going to open up, it's going to rotate, and then it'll close up and heat it for 50 more seconds. And there it goes rotating. Now the seam got to somewhere over in here, so it must rotate about 180 degrees as well. Now the moment of truth. This tumbler's all the way cooled off. I'm just going to cut a little slit in the tape. When you're using scissors or anything sharp around these tumblers, just be real careful. Oh my goodness, look at that. Because if you scratch the coating, it's going to show. Now this silver thing's probably going to come off when I lift this up. That's perfectly fine. Now these do come with rubber bottoms. Of course you don't add that until after the sublimation process because it would probably melt. Now, based upon what I saw earlier, I think this is going to be gorgeous. I just hope that it looks like this everywhere, that I don't have any ghosting or anything terrible. You know, I was worried about this area right here. So let's see how that looks. And it turned out fine. It looks very good. Look at how pretty this is. Now remember the white area? I was able to cut most of that off. This is gorgeous. All right, so let's look at the top seam. That looks really good. Let's look at the bottom seam. Look how crisp that line is. Now, I don't mind this little bit of white at all. I truly don't. I like to get that crisp edge, and that's how you get it. That's beautiful. I'm super happy with this one. Now, hopefully my mother-in-law's turned out really nice too, so I don't have to give her mine. This is still pretty warm, but it's not so hot that I can't handle it. There's that protective paper. You can see a little bit of the image right here. That's why you use that protective paper. If you don't use that, that is going to go on your press. All right, let me take a peek. That looks good. That looks beautiful. That looks really beautiful. Now remember I showed you on the image how it starts to fade out? That was part of the design, and it's not a flaw of the tumbler, the sublimation ink, or anything like that. It's very pretty. So here's the top. It looks great. And the bottom, that looks great. Both presses did an awesome job. So I hope you enjoyed seeing how the two different presses work. They do work very differently, but the end result is pretty much the same. We have two beautiful tumblers. So thanks so much for joining me, and I hope to see you in the next video.